Welcome everyone to our last panel for the Sports Cross Art Day here at our Basel Conversation. I'm thrilled to welcome you to a panel entitled Rethinking the Fields, Museum and the Power of Sports with three eminent speakers. The artist Paul Pfeiffer, the incredible critic Seph Rodney. This panel is moderated by a co-conspirator from OffBall, Kelley. So thank you very much all for being here, and handing over to you, Kelley. Thank you.
Hi, you guys. Thank you for being here. It seems like we already have a bunch of friends of Paul and Seph in the audience, so that is wonderful. My name is Shanon Kelley. I am an executive at a sports media platform called OffBall. We cover the culture of sport, so this was a conversation that I was very, very excited to moderate, not only because of these two wonderful gentlemen, but they were also responsible for my favorite exhibitions of the past 2 years. I don't know if you guys were lucky enough to see Prologue to the Story to the Birth of Freedom, which was Paul's amazing retrospective at the Los Angeles MoCA, and then Get in the Game, of course, Sports, Art, Culture, that was co-curated by Seph here at SF MoMA. I actually was lucky enough to see them both a few times, brought friends, just really, really incredible, and gave me just a lot of things to think about in terms of the future of this relationship between sports and cultural institutions. So let me introduce these gentlemen right here, and then we'll get right into it. For those of you who are unaware, Paul Pfeiffer has been making work in video, photography, installation, and sculpture since the late 1990s. Known for his innovative manipulation of digital media, Pfeiffer recast the visual language of mass media spectacle to examine how images shape our awareness of ourselves and the world. And as I mentioned, his retrospective was just currently at LA MoCA. And Seph, of course, is a regular contributor to the New York Times, also a former senior critic for Hyperallergic. You've also written for CNN, NBC, Art in America, Art Forum, The Guardian, and many others. In 2020, you were awarded the Rabkin Prize for Arts Journalism, and in 2022, the Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, and you were a co-curator for Get in the Game. So I'm not sure if we want to go, oh, I have the clicker, hold on. I will go through, we'll start with, oh, Paul. I'm going to start with you. This was a question that Seph and I actually were discussing even before we all got together. And I think, you know, my main question for you with Seph shares is why? Why have you dedicated your career and your art to this mass spectacle of sport, or predominantly sport, I would say?
Well, thank you. I kind of found it in a very intuitive, circumstantial way, and to make a long story short, I just had this intuition in the late 90s, when there was a moment when the WNBA rebooted and we're playing at Madison Square Garden. And it was kind of like a thing for people in the East Village and in a way for the queer community. And so there would be groups that would go to see WNBA games. I also similarly had a group of friends who were interested in going to see things like the Golden State Warriors. Sorry, the amateur boxing.
Golden Gloves.
Golden Gloves. I was going to say Golden Globes. And so, which is to say, I come from a family of musicians with very little background spectating sports, and so kind of entering into it in the late 90s, going into Madison Square Garden for the first time, it just blew my mind. And I intuited that whether you were a sports fan or not, it would be familiar. And I liked the idea that it would constitute a kind of immediately accessible entry point. And I also had a feeling, just from my initial experiences of being in Madison Square Garden, that there was a lot going on. that it was a very complex scenario, a lot to impact there. So I like this kind of duality of like a kind of very intuitive entry point that actually potentially could go in many different directions and go quite deep.
So can I just follow up on that?
Of course you can.
A couple of things. One is that I describe sporting events in this way, and tell me if this makes sense to you. That it's, you know, in a sort of story of our development as a species. There was a moment in humanity's history where we gathered around a fire and told each other stories, right? To keep the night and the creatures that could harm us at bay, right? We also gathered together for things like sporting events because it was a moment where we could celebrate what our bodies could do. And we could look at another human being and say, wow, they did that, right? They jumped so high, they ran so fast, they threw that thing so far. And it feels like it's a moment, again, where we gather around together to experience a story about who we are. So sports always feels to me like at the heart of what it is to be a human being on this planet. And another thing is that you had mentioned the moment of the resurgence of the WNBA. And one of the reasons that I think we got together and made the show Get in the Game, which was at SF MoMA, opened October of last year and I think closed February of this year, was that we knew that sports was a way to talk about politics in a way that makes sense to people, right? So, you know, some people, their eyes glaze over once you start talking about feminist politics and what that means for women's autonomy, la la la. But if you say, look at the WNBA and the way that women have the chance to make a living, to display their physical talents, to develop as athletes like other athletes do, and actually be professionals in their sports, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's feminism at work. It's like, that's autonomy, right? So I feel like sports is a way to really get at all these particular things about being a human being and about being a human being in this moment in time.
I think that is a great segue to also talk about, I mean, it's hard because it's a still image here, but how many of you guys have seen Red, Green, and Blue, Paul's video installation piece? You guys are so lucky. It's one of my favorite pieces. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, Paul, because you embedded with the University of Georgia, specifically the Red Coat Marching Band, which just crazy name, by the way. But, you know, the Bulldogs, I think, are second in the SEC now. It's a huge football, like, huge football state, football school. Like, what was that like? And what was that, to me, you know, that encompasses just this ritual, this almost prayer-like devotion that people have to sports that Seph was talking about, and not just looking at, look what these athletes can do, but like, look what it's kind of doing to all of us, look what it's making all of us feel. And that really came out in your piece, so I was hoping you could speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, you know, there was in the lead up to Get in the Game, like, we were trying to see if there would be space for it.
You know, we were trying. It was hard.
It was a big disappointment.
That would have been so good.
Kind of, but just to say, yeah, there was just like a lot of connectivity around it, and Kitty Giha, who is the director of galleries at UGA, I met when I was teaching at University of Georgia. I went down there as a visiting faculty on an invitation, kind of because I knew it was one of the top 4 football schools in the US. And I just wanted to check it out. And I thought, here's the perfect opportunity. And sure enough, you know, like basically being a visiting faculty member in the art department was a way to get to meet people who then could get me press passes. So that I could do what no one can ever do, which is bring microphones and cameras into the stadium. It's a 100,000 seat stadium, and it's like Fort Knox. and I got to bring in like a whole crew with the idea that what I was going to do is document the marching band that plays during the football games, and it seems simple enough, but the relationship of the band to the entire machinery of the stadium and the football culture in this Southeastern Conference university is profound. I came to realize that the relationship between the band and the action on the field, and the relationship between what the band plays and the sort of call and response with the fans and with the players is like 10 times more ritualistic than I could have ever imagined. Every single thing is a ritual. There's a song for first down, second down, third down, for fouls, for goals. There's a whole itinerary of songs that are played at the end of every match, and there's additional songs that are played if the team wins. There's many songs that entail a back and forth between the crowd and the band, and like a call and response, and also a lot of what the band plays are requests from the team. The band is meant to hype everyone, including, and in a way, especially the athletes. So they play what the football players want to hear when they're on the field, and you can see them kind of like vibing to it. So I came to think of the band as like an emotional generator, or even like a kind of like a machine for producing affective behavior, and by extension, the whole stadium is that. The whole culture is that. It is like religion, and specifically my parents are lifelong church musicians. So I understood this right away, that what's happening here is a kind of verbal and nonverbal kind of system that people are acculturated into, and in a multi-generational process become like fans or even believers of the team and the culture.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say that hyping people up is a real thing. I mean, it has real effects in a way that I think is profoundly understood by athletes and people who observe athletes. I can tell you that as a former athlete myself, I didn't do well in competition. I was always a little bit too nervous and at odds with myself. But when I was actually practicing, I was a fencer, and when I was actually in the
Did you say you were a fencer?
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I fence foil. And when I was in the practice sort of medium, my coach yelling at me was the encouragement I needed to get it right. So that kind of, that sense of like building someone up so they can do what they didn't maybe even know that they could do, were capable of, that's a real thing. And you see that come to the surface in organized sports.
I want to switch to get in the game for a second, but I want to come back to what you were saying, Paul, because outside, not to bury the lead, but you and I were speaking about how you're just fascinated by these occurrences in sports, and you want to document it without really thinking about, what's next, like the show or the installation, or And so I think I really want to get into our main discussion here about museums and about the power of those cultural institutions, because your retrospective altogether was really something amazing to behold, because it was just such a cacophony of, if I'm pronouncing that word right, of just sound and visuals and experiences all in once, rather than seeing everything like one at a time of your pieces, that I really, really just was drawn to. So we'll talk about that in a second, but then first I want to discuss Get in the Game, and Seph asked the same question of you, which was why? Why did you feel the need to create this exhibition and this space to bring together so many different forms of art that was centered on sport? And so let me go to a few of these, and we can come back to Paul's work, which is all incredible as well. Here is lot. Paul, you have so much work. It's incredible. Here we go. All right. So here was Get in the Game at SF MoMA. This was the entrance when you walked in. Just some really amazing artists in this collection, in this exhibition. A lot of things that people could participate in directly, not just this never-ending foosball table, but that's my favorite, Allen Iverson. You know, this four-person ping pong set. So please tell us about it. Tell us how this came about.
So there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I think the way that makes most sense to me right now in the moment is to talk about how do we get populism right.
Yes.
So
yes.
I make my living mostly as a critic, so I'm going to be very critical right now and say that I saw a show at Brooklyn Museum. I live in New York, in the Hudson Valley actually, and I review lots of exhibitions in New York City. And I saw a show I didn't review the show, but there was a show at the Brooklyn Museum, retrospective, I suppose, on KAWS, K-A-W-S, you know that artist? Yes, I see you nodding appreciatively. And I feel like that's not...
Which is now at SF MoMA, by the way.
Yeah, right. But that's not, for me, populism done right. Because I don't think that there's anything in KAWS that gives us a sense of like what is in us that is wonderful, that is great, that is curious, that is indomitable. Like I didn't get none of that from that work. And when we put together this show at SF MoMA, we were thinking that we could do several things at the same time, right? We could talk about the spirit, the human spirit, and how it overcomes the body at moments, right? And think about that moment back in the 80s, if you were around for this, when I think it was Kerry Strug, who was on the Olympics gymnast team, the women's team, and I think she made a vault, and she came down and badly hurt her ankle. And she was basically on one leg. She had the last, I think, go in that event, and she was basically hobbling on one leg, and she did it. Like, she found a way to get through that thing and like win the gold. And I mean, it was literally her spirit, her mind overcoming her body. And we wanted an opportunity to talk about things like that. And we also wanted to talk about like the politics of, you know, gender and the politics of race representation, how that all comes to the surface in sports. You know, we talk about Jesse Owens at the Berlin Olympics and how he basically put the kibosh on the fewest, you know, wet dream to have Germans dominate the world. These are moments, these are touchstone moments, right? You can see them in sports. You can see these things that Brandi Chastain ripping off her jersey after she scored, and that moment of like women coming into their power and unapologetically. That was amazing. There were 5 themes that we had that we sussed out that we needed to explore through, and these were ways into all of the things I'm talking about. The themes were mind and body, breaking records and rules. I should say mind and body being, you know, about the sort of relationship between the mind and the body. Breaking records and rules being about the history of representation of gender and of race and of people with disabilities, winning and losing. Of course, the storm and drang, the inevitable drama of trying to get that brass ring and sometimes failing. And failing in really obvious ways. And then fans' life, because so much of what sports is about people who are fans and who literally live, in some ways live vicariously through these athletes. Fans' life and, field of play, which is talking about the sort of context in which a game plays. So the socio-political context, the national context, the other context. So these were all ways into talking about these very complicated and layered issues that really, you know, again, I think it's a way to get populism right? To get people in the door who may not have normally come to a museum for a big show, because they see in the museum something in themselves that they completely recognize.
So a question for both of you then, and going back to your retrospective too, Paul, is why now? I think both of your exhibitions happened within, months of each other, and it feels like such a moment. And I'm curious to know your thoughts of, why now? Why are museums and cultural institutions suddenly being like, yes, let's represent all of this, and let's, bring people that maybe ordinarily wouldn't go to a museum, but draw them for different reasons now, and have them kind of face to face with this reality of the spectacle, the ritual, the devotion, the love of sport?
For me, I guess there's two things I would want to say, of the 5 areas of the show, like I remember the one that I engaged was the last one, the field of play. I think as somebody who started as a printmaker and then actually went through the advent of desktop computers. I literally, I'm of the age where I went from making artwork out of color Xerox to working on the computer as they were coming out. And I taught it at the New School in New York, and basically was teaching myself and then teaching students the next week what I'd learned in Photoshop and Premiere and stuff. I think, we've obviously gone through a revolution and are continuing to. And I think, both technologically and culturally, as I think that the fields of sports and religion are the 2 places that I think of as central sites for the development of new media. It's the megachurches who experiment in the vanguard with HD and each next generation of image-making tools and communication tools, because that's their business. And in a sense, it's the same with sports. So it's not surprising that the most visible social media platforms in the world are teams, stadiums, and individual athletes. People like Cristiano Ronaldo or Juventus. So in a way, there's an interest to, if you wanted to track the evolution of technology and the kind of related culture that the technology is meant to produce, sports is one place where you could see it really crystallized in real time as it's happening. The other thing is that just going back to this idea of the field of play, I have this idea that we're living in a very networked world now, and a global networked world, and in a sense, to be an athlete on a field, much like being an artist in the art world, you cannot have an individual voice that excels unless you understand the game, and you understand how to play it, and you're not afraid to play it. This, to me, describes a counterintuitive relationship between individual identity and systems. In a way, there is no individual voice without participation and a kind of innovating and embracing of the system of communication or the field of play. That is how I individuate myself, is by understanding the rules and then learning how to break them or transform them into rules that come from my body and my brain. So again, this to me is crystallized on every level of the culture of sports.
I think that also answered why now, right? I think the technology is there. I think about, in the last panel, you know, they ended with talking about social media, and that is also a huge part of it now too, where suddenly you can follow your favorite artists, you can follow your favorite athletes, and you can be immersed in their lives, and you can see every aspect of them, like what they're wearing, what they're eating, what they're listening to. So it's a really interesting time to be a sports fan and an athlete and an artist and anybody in this world. But Seth, same question for you. Why now? Why now, do you think, is this moment happening?
Well, I do think that part of what's been happening for museums is that I actually wrote a book on this because I did my PhD in
The inclusivity of
personalization.
Yeah, personalization.
The personalization of the museum visit. For reasons that are too many to go into right now, or would take too long to explain, museums have, in the last generation, become very, very concerned about what people do when they visit museums and interested in getting people in the door. Museums used to, at one point, 2 generations ago or so, were very much more about educating the public. Or they were very sort of inward-facing and were more interested in carrying out research. Now they're very interested, for the most part, I should stick to what I know. Museums of art are very interested in getting people in the door, and part of the way they do that is by understanding that people have come to museums for different reasons. Some want to have a spiritual experience. Some want to just hang out with their friends and see something fun. Other people want to actually go deep into a subject matter and learn more about it. And some want to spend time with their families. There are a host of reasons. And actually, some want to do it just for the sort of like street cred, just sort of like cultural kind of credentials. Yeah, like, oh, I was there. Museums want to be able to reach all of these people. And so, especially with their marketing campaigns, look at the image for Get in the Game. It looks a little bit like a sports venue, right? Like, it's like saying, okay, come and see the exciting action and the colors and people like you, like, fighting it out for their team and their hero. This is a moment when museums are finally figuring out that in order to survive, and in order to thrive, they need to have more people who are everyday people, right? Museums have always been sort of, they are an enlightenment project, and they have never been able to fully appeal to people who are working class and poor. They've always been sort of, mainly had upper class, middle class profiles. That's changing. And I think it's changing because of pressure, because museums recognize that in order to survive, they need to change. So that's part of why now.
I mean, you've answered a million of my questions already, so let's just keep it going. And what do you think that museums can learn from sports? I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but specifically, like, what are there things that they can take away from sports to help, like, bring this inclusivity, bring this personalization? Like, are there things that each can take away from one or the other? Because I'm very fascinated by this too, especially as one is experiencing Paul's pieces in a museum. Like, I feel like I'm in the stadium, I feel like I'm there, but I'm, honing in on specific aspects of it. So what else can museums, I think, take away from that, from this ritual of sport?
Well, there's maybe, there's several things, but there's one thing that we talked about, Katie, Jennifer, and I co-curated this together. Katie Siegel, Jennifer Dunlop-Fletcher. One of the things we talked about was how, there's always a relationship between hype and the actual doing of the thing. And we talked about how, artists write these florid press releases, right? And they say that their work is about, interrogating certain aspects of the patriarchy, right? And then when you see the work, it's like a school desk that's turned over on its side. And you're like, what? similarly, there's a lot of hype that goes on in sports where you talk up, the particular athlete, like, oh, this person is having a great season, da 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 da. They get into the batter's box, and they face down a 90-mile-an-hour pitch, and either they hit the damn thing, or they strike out, or they're struck out looking, just standing there like a dope. Like, you can talk a really good game, but the thing about, and this is a parallel, I think, between art and sports, is like, when it comes down to it, you have to do the thing, and then the thing is done, and then you can either point to that and say, yes, that is really successful, right? Or you say, he struck out. She didn't make the ball into the basket. Like, that happens. Like, failure is real. And I feel like in both sort of realms of human endeavor, we really risk failure. And you have to be brave. I'm actually talking about several parallels now, but it's sort of one of the animating ideas for me was that both sports and art are places where you can see the distinction between the rhetoric and the actual thing itself, like what actually happens.
I've tried to, I love what you said, and I like my own version of it is that I think I've been researching for a project coming up, some aspects of like what was happening in LA in the 1960s or the 50s into the 60s, and just obviously this was a moment of cultural revolution, and in a way also technological revolution. There was, it's a watershed moment, which I think is not unlike, in a new way, the situation we're in now. And in a sense, like what happens in these moments of like rapid, sudden, extreme change or evolution in a way, is everything becomes extra plastic, meaning malleable. Everything is always malleable, actually, from an artist's point of view or like an editor's point of view. But at certain moments, it becomes very evident that everything is extra plastic and malleable. And in a sense, that's partially because the inherited structures, the inherited language, the political categories, the cultural categories, they actually are not kind of they're not working anymore to describe what we're actually experiencing. Like for me, in these moments, we can't rest on our heels of inherited categories. We have to experiment. And in a sense, this is a moment when like a traditional notion of art as being separate from life doesn't fully make sense. And in a way, we have to explore the possibility of working in ways in which we no longer separate life from art, or life from poetic, language or aesthetic production. The stakes are too high, and in fact, if what we're trying to do as artists is to tell a story about like what's really happening, the inherited language doesn't cut it. So in a way, I think that's what museums are feeling. Maybe their traditional audiences aren't coming anymore because it kind of isn't reflecting what's actually happening on the street. So along with everybody else, they got to experiment if they want to reach people. And they got to think about like, what is the new audience now?
Well said. That is so perfect too, because obviously this is why Art Basel is doing for the first year ever this art and sport crossover conversation. And as the last talk for this day, I wanted to maybe we can, final question or close to final question for both of you is, where do you see this collaboration between sport and art headed? Paul, you could talk about it from the creative artist side, and Seph from the academic side. But Seph, do you want to start us off?
Where is it headed? Oh, wow. I think.
Or where do you hope it's headed? What?
Okay, I can answer that.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't know the answer to the first question. Where I hope it's headed is that museums take on, especially when I say museums, and what I really mean is that the professional cadre of curators and exhibition designers and directors take on this idea more of lessening the distance between art and life, like really shrinking that, right? Because you're right, it doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't. I mean, there was a moment when we would think about, this special person going off to this special studio and painting this huge painting, and like it being breathtaking and sort of ushering everyone into the sublime. And that's an old model. And that has little to do with how most of us live. I love the idea of the artist taking her child with her and making art with them, right? Right in the home. And yes, that doesn't necessarily have to be destined for the gallery, but it can be. There's no necessary separation between art and life. And I think museums moving forward will find ways to, and not just, maybe it's not just sports, maybe it's also, there'll be other ways in to doing that. Yeah.
I mean, for the record though, I love painting. I mean, I don't think traditions go away. They just, in a way, they reinvent. I mean, that's what was happening in the 60s, and it was happening at the turn of the century. It's not like things are always the same. And in a way, innovation and tradition are not like binary either.
Good point.
But there's a continual process of like reinvention that I think has to occur to keep something living. Yeah, I just generally I like the idea that there's a tradition in both the art world or like in the field of art, as well as in education, of like approaching creativity as a laboratory. And I feel like where it's going is, and where I hope it's going is that that we really invest in renewing this spirit of experimentation and innovation in all possible ways. And I mean, for me, in relation to what you just said, Seph, given that in a way like image making and life, or like art making and life, are really hybridizing in like very strange ways now, because of social media, because of like live streaming, because of all kinds of things that are like kind of just not following the rules of like traditional art forms of the past. In a way, that laboratory extends into life. Like, Suzanne Lacey, who was in the last panel, like, we know each other a little bit, and she works in ways that fully engage people as a kind of like shapeable material or relations between people, and I really love that idea, and it can take many forms.
Well, another thing I love about you is you're always curious, and it seems like you're following wherever your curiosity goes, and that is the future for you of your work, which I really, really admire. Okay, we're technically out of time, but I have one last wild card question for both of you. If you could design a new kind of cultural space that centers on sports and art and culture, what is one element that you would insist upon being in that space or part of it?
I will take the opportunity
Go
to talk
for it.
about, like I have this idea, and I'm not like, I'm maybe getting ahead of myself in terms of pitching it, because I think I agree with Seph Rodney, like I just need to do it. but I have this idea that the stadium, which, you know, like as much as possible, the stadiums try to like have their calendar be active every day because time is money. But there's always downtime, and given that like a lot of stadiums now are interested in like, you know, the optics of supporting art, and art doesn't have to be like, you know, object plopped down in the entryway to the stadium or something. Like I have this idea that the stadium could be like a very rich context to host a kind of group study process focused on observational filmmaking, forensic field recording, in a sense, like on a practical level, understanding exactly what's happening production-wise within this piece of architecture which is built for it, both broadcasting as well as creating mass spectator experience within the physical premises. There's a lot of layers going on, not to mention live, like exceptional live performance happening on the field. So you've got this very heady mix of live performance plus like intense mediated construction of like broadcast image as well as kind of, you know, intensified affective experience within the stadium. So like
Brilliant.
to put together a kind of like a very kind of curated group to learn by just being backstage with the recording devices. And I've been pitching it, and I'm on the verge of having a first version of it happen at Barclays Center in Brooklyn.
Oh my God. Heard it here first.
So I have the germ of an idea, which is that I don't know if any of you have seen banana baseball lately.
Of course. The Savannah bananas?
Well, it's what I'd love to have in that center that we're imagining is a particular curator that is geared towards making the game more about that kind of fun, that kind of sort of enthusiastic, like it's so much more almost ridiculous, like it's so much more just balletic and just like flagrant, right? Like just you know, you don't have to catch the ball by doing a sort of ball kick and turn, but they do that.
They
right?
sell out 90,000 seat stadiums, by the way.
They're amazing, and I think what they do is they infuse the idea of being a fan with that kind of sort of, you know, flourish, that sort of, that sense of like, I'm not just gonna like catch the ball, I'm gonna catch it beautifully. Like, I'd love to have a curator in that sort of imaginary place, like emphasizing that. Like, we're gonna do this thing with elegance and with panache. Like, let's bring panache into this.
Brilliant answer. Oh, I don't know. Okay, one question.
I am listening and it sounds great, but I just want. Thank you very much, appreciate it. Yes, I was listening and it sounds great, but if you allow me, I would like to put on the table a very important element to consider. So historically, art have been, you know, an action that comes from the spirit, intellect, and everything involved, and always think in Jackson Pollock as someone who tried to, you know, to put the hand at maximum. Oppositely, the sport, you know, have been exhausting the physical. It's a physical action and spiritual, everything is, of course, but physically. So if I think in a stadium as let's go to do this and that about art, I believe it somehow could contradict, you know, the essence of the art, who is more engaging the spiritual more than the explosive, the physical. So what about the opposite? Why not then the sportive go in a minor scale? Otherwise, it's contradictory, and I don't think that that will work. In terms of scale.
That is a great thought, and maybe to end on, and maybe we could discuss it afterwards. Thank you for that. Unless you guys wanted to discuss, we are just at time, and I know.
Yeah, just to say that in a way, like, I mean, I love what you're saying. I do think that in a way, spirit and body don't oppose each other. That in a way, sometimes the root of the spirit to the spiritual is through the physical. Or the material. I mean, and in some ways, I agree. The framework should be spiritual.
One day. Thank you so much, Paul and Seph. You guys are brilliant. I'm so happy to talk to you both. Thank you.